Hi, and welcome to the channel Biblical Mysteries. My name is Dr. Rich Sorensen. I'm your host for this channel. And one of my long-term interests is the Shroud of Turin. I've written several articles on it that will eventually be turned into videos, but a few days ago I collaborated with Dr. John Campbell on discussing one of my articles and the many challenges to the authenticity of the Shroud and responses to those challenges. Now, Dr. Campbell has produced many videos, primarily on the topics of health and the negative impact of vaccines, and particularly those that were produced in the COVID era. And he has a huge global audience with hundreds of thousands of views. And a link to his channel is in the description box if you'd like to check him out. But he is also interested in the Shroud of Turin, and a number of views on his video on the Shroud exceeded 2 million. So he graciously agreed to have me join him to consider the challenges to the Shroud's authenticity, both scientific and historical. So without further ado, here's the video of our session.
You are very welcome to this talk, as is Dr. Rich Sorensen, all the way from Rhode Island, Rich, I believe.
Yes, that's true. You got it right.
Now, I've called you doctor because you are a doctor of psych. You've got a PhD in psychology. But you're primarily a software engineer, I believe. You've done that for a long time.
Yep, that's true.
In fact, you've done it for about 50 years, so that must have been pretty well the start of the software industry, was it?
Yes, I'm a dinosaur.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's probably
not extinct yet.
Probably less than 50 years since I've heard the term software. Anyway,
right.
We have a really serious topic to discuss today. I mean, the reason that I contacted you, I read your paper on the Shroud of Turin. Now, the video, I basically started studying this I was always aware of it, but I probably started studying it about a year ago now. And I studied it in some detail. I read a few of the standard texts on it. And based on my very limited understanding, I made a video probably 6 months ago. And I can't remember how many views it's had, but it's millions. Well over 2 million views. So there's clearly an interest here.
Yeah, and John, I must say, I really admired your channel and admired your stand that you took back in the COVID days. My wife and I had watched a number of your episodes on vaccine and so forth. So and I really thank you and appreciate being on your channel here, and thank you for all your work down through the years on a variety of topics. So anyway,
it's very kind of you to say so, Rich. Yeah, we started a while back with VHS tapes, and in 1991 I think was the first one, but so I guess we've been going for over 30 years now. Anyway, right. The Shroud, to me, if the Shroud of Turin. Well, just give us a few sentences. What the heck is the Shroud of Turin before we discuss its significance?
Well, the Shroud of Turin, of course, is purported to be the burial shroud of Jesus Christ. And is purported to have survived the entire time since 33 AD, or exactly whenever it was he was crucified, buried, and then risen from the dead. And so this article that you're interested in, that I've written, and I've studied the Shroud now for probably 25 years, long-term interest in it, written a number of articles on it. And its authenticity has aroused intense and sometimes even hostile debate between those who believe that the Shroud is authentic and those who don't. Because accepting or rejecting the Shroud is to me, it's an issue of either being a Christian or not being a Christian, being an anti-Christian. And so for Christians, it's not really necessarily a central issue, because if the Shroud is a fake, it doesn't really affect your faith. But if it is authentic, then it's dramatic evidence in favor of it. And so a lot of people that are against Christianity have basically kind of lined up to try and attack it.
I think that's a critical point, really. To give the bottom line of this discussion away, we won't be able to say definitively at the end of this talk whether this is the burial shroud of Christ or not. We'll give evidence that convinces me, but we won't be able to say definitively. But if someone comes along and completely proves that it's an utter hoax, that doesn't alter the core truths of Christianity. Faith is not based on the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin. But if it is genuine, then that is a major challenge to unbelief.
Yes, very true. And to echo what you just said, there is no such thing as proof in the scientific sense of anything historical. We can't prove, for example, even that Julius Caesar lived. But there's a lot of evidence that he did, a lot of writings, but we can't prove it. So we can't prove that the shroud is the burial cloth of Christ. But what we should know is that the shroud is the most highly and intensively studied artifact and relic in the history of the world. One source indicated that there was like between 100 and 150,000 scientific man hours that have been spent on studying this thing. So there has been a lot of people that have, put their toe in this pond and tried to look at it one way or the other.
And there's a lot of things that have come to light in the scientific age, things that have come to light in the age of photography, and a lot of things that have come to light since that we're talking about. And it's not really possible to summarize that. So if people want that, basically they've got to stick around. I hate these videos that give you don't tell you what the bottom line is till you're halfway through. It's not that. It's just that this is a complicated issue.
Right.
But it is remarkably highly studied. I think it's fair to say there's a divide here between the Catholic and the Protestant world, which is unfortunate. Largely speaking, the Catholic world is somewhat aware and accepts the shroud. The Protestant world tends to dismiss it almost as an a priori. And I think it was one of the Protestant theologians, John Calvin, who actually wrote a book about relics, saying how it was a load of poppycock. And Martin Luther, I think, himself pointed out that 16 of the 12 apostles were buried in Spain. So, right. So there has been a lot of racketeering in the past.
Oh, there's no question about that. There's no question. And
what is it separates the two?
Well, I think that it's right that we should question the shroud and approach it with skepticism, because, as you just indicated, the history of religious artifacts is filled with many, many fraudulent attempts to make money at the expense of basically naive people. And I should point out that there have been a number of fake shrouds that have been produced. In fact, one researcher claimed that there were 42 of them at one point all around Europe. But most of them were not actually intended to deceive anybody. They're simply pieces of cloth or artistic copies. And some of these, quote-unquote shrouds still exist in various places. So it is correct that we'd be skeptical of the shroud because of all of the this history of fakery.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Now, I believe you knew Mr. Barry Schwartz, who started off as a was he a Jewish non-Christian? Yes.
In fact, he was Jewish and never really became a Christian, but nevertheless, he believed in the authenticity of the shroud. And he was the videographer of what's called the STIRP team, the Shroud of Turin Research Project, which was the team that did major studies of the shroud, the most major studies ever done in 1978. And he was the one that took all the videos. So he was not a scientist, but he took the videos. And then after that, because he had the records of all of the tapes and a lot of the materials, he became the custodian and actually founded the site shroud.com, which I would encourage people to go out to see all kinds of different materials on the shroud.
It is quite excellent and very comprehensive.
Yes, and he is deceased. He died last year, but what he did is he established a foundation for basically continuing his work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you met him and were able to talk to him at one stage.
Yes, I met him the last when we were in Turin to see the shroud.
Better tell us about that. If you want to see the shroud, what do you have to do?
Well, the shroud, you can't just go and see it. No. Basically what happens is the Catholic Church has decided that they will make the shroud viewable on a schedule. And at the time, the last time I looked, and I could be wrong about this, but they were showing it once every 10 years. And of course, the shroud is sensitive, and it's a very, very ancient linen, and so they don't have it out in the sunlight at all. We saw it in 2010, and I'm not sure what their policies are going to be in the future, but if you want to see it, you have to basically find out what the Vatican is doing, because the Vatican is the one that owns it and controls it.
Mm-hmm. How long did you get actually in front of the shroud? A minute or two?
We were there for about half an hour, possibly as long as an hour. There was a huge line. The line to get in there was it took us about 3 hours to get in. But once you're in there, of course, you have a long time to view the shroud. And I actually have a replica, a 1/40th scale replica of the shroud in my living room.
Must have been quite an experience to see it, though.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Now, although after you look at it, you're kind of unimpressed, because the image is faint. It's not artistic at all. It's unimpressive. Let's put it that way. Until you actually start looking at the characteristics of it, then it becomes impressive.
We will be showing a few excellent quality photographs and things which are available. Let's deal with the main challenge. 1988, carbon-14 dating. Debunk the whole thing. It was made in 1260 to 1390 AD. Therefore, can't be the Shroud of Christ.
And I think this is one of the reasons why Protestants are skeptical, because these results were published, of course, widely, and people that wanted to debunk the shroud, thought that this was the coup de grace on the shroud. And because the dating of it came in 1988, and what they did is they took a sample, they cut a sample out of the bottom part of the shroud. Unfortunately, it was kind of a dirty part. And they went to 3 different labs, and all of them more or less agreed, and it came back to a dating of around 300 AD, between 260 and 390, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
However,
so round about 850 years oldish.
Correct. Medieval.
Yeah.
However, Roy Rogers, who was one of the STIRP team members, actually got a hold of these samples and discovered that the pieces that were used for testing contained rewoven fibers, because the shroud has been repaired down through the centuries. And so with these fibers being added to the shroud, added to the piece that they actually used for cutting and for testing, it meant that part of the stuff that they were testing was actually newer threads. And so that sort of invalidated the whole dating process and discredited the dating process. But of course, a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. And as well as that, there's so much human and bacterial contamination in it. And that human and bacterial and fungal contamination will have accumulated over potentially, let's say, two millennia. And a lot of that will be relatively recent.
Yes, and they tried to, the people that did the testing, they tried to clean the samples. But again, that may have been part of it. That may have been an aspect to it. And unfortunately, what they did is they took it from a part of the shroud that had been handled quite a bit. It was like the bottom part that was kind of very dirty. So
yeah,
that was the bottom line on the dating.
And is it true that the nuns that perhaps repaired it put some sort of lotion on it to make it look the same color as the rest of the shroud? Is that probably true?
It's possible. And of course, the shroud has been shown and possibly washed or had stuff done through it through the centuries. So, who knows what all has been done? We really don't know. And if we have a chance, we can go through some of the history later on. And I'll explain the history to you so you understand that.
But I think the key thing is that there's good evidence that the sample was taken from an area which had been repaired at a much later date. And
yes, and if you read the articles, in this article, there's an article on this on Shroud.com, and they actually show you, I think, a blown up example so you could see that some of the newer threads that are in the sample.
And I've heard that some of the repair was cotton as well. Have you heard about that?
Yes, it was. It was.
And of course, to put the background on that, to use cotton in the original shroud would have been unthinkable in terms of Jewish law. Because pure linen was the garment of the priests, the spies in Jericho were hid under the flax.
Well, that's true, but you have to remember that Jesus was buried in haste.
Yes.
And I think that, and as we'll see later on, the shroud was that we have was not the kind of the similar shroud that most people were buried in. And so I think what probably happened is that the guy who provided the shroud, Joseph of Arimathea, grabbed a piece of cloth and they wrapped him in that, and it happened to be linen, but it wasn't necessarily a shroud that people would typically be wrapped in or buried in.
Okay, I thought it might have been Joseph's shroud that he was using.
Possibly.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, this isn't a cop-out. There is... And the other thing about that carbon dating is freedom of information requests had to be used to, for want of a better word, extract the data from the British Museum, as I understand it.
That's right. They were very, very reticent to give any dating on it. And by the way, there was a book recently published, and I have a copy of it. And it's something like the dating of the shroud. I forget now the title of the shroud, the title of the book, and I'll grab it and I'll give it to you later. Right, and he talks about this, the difficulty of getting the dating and the information from the British Museum.
Which is rather strange, because you would think they'd want to encourage open debate, but there again, that's what it is. So, given that it was repaired with later material, the carbon dating, the carbon dating is not reliable, and there are papers that say this. But to me, it probably also indicates, combined with the way it's stored now, that carbon dating could never be used in the future as a definitive answer. I don't think that's how we're going to get a definitive date on the shroud. There's more modern techniques, though, that have been used for dating, aren't there? Yep.
And the shroud was dated with this new method of dating ancient textiles.
Yeah.
And this, I think I was telling you about this. This is a technology that's called WAXS, WAXS. It stands for wide angle X-ray scattering.
Yeah.
And basically what it does is it operates by detecting the degree of structural degradation in the threads of the cloth. And so what they've done is using this method, they've dated a whole bunch of ancient fabrics. And the shroud itself is dated to the period from around about 55 to 74 AD, or a little bit after 33 AD. But of course, it's not necessarily totally accurate. But it does place the shroud in the era of Christ.
Very much so. And that technique was also used on fragments, as I understand it, from Masada, which was the last hideout of the Jews during the time of the Roman invasion. I'm guessing at about 73 AD.
Yep.
And there's fabrics from that are definitively dated via other methods. And there's a similar kind of result there with the shroud as to the Masada textiles.
Right, correct. That's correct.
I mean, surely the most obvious thing is how the image got on the cloth. This is the big question. Could it have been a painting?
Well, that's what some have alleged, and there are various methods that they've alleged that the shroud has been, this image has appeared. It could be a painting, a photograph. Some people have alleged that it was a bleaching. Other people have tried to indicate that it was possibly a rubbing from a material.
Yeah, like you do a brass rubbing in old churches. You just rub stuff over the top of the brass contours.
Exactly. Other people have said possibly it was a scorching from a hot statue. There was a super accurate statue made. Other people said it was possibly a 3D block print. So people have proposed a whole bunch of different methods of a possible fakery, where the shroud could have been faked to produce this image that it has. But The problem with all of these explanations is that there are a number of shroud characteristics that they fail at explaining.
Yep.
That's really the problem.
And we want to look into those, but basically there's a good historical provenance for the shroud from about 1355 to 1357, where there's good documented evidence that what we know to be the shroud was on public view. So
Yes.
if the shroud, and then there's a provenance, there's a history all the way from that period that's pretty, okay, it's historical, but it's as watertight as historical provenances get. So that's from 1355, 1357. We know it's at least that old. So we know for sure the shroud existed in, say, 1355. So if the shroud is a forgery, it must have been forged before 1355.
Correct.
With technology that was available.
In that era, right.
But I mean, say no later than 1360 or you know, it's within a few years of that time. So we're very much in that medieval period if it was a forgery. Now, on my comments, of which there were several tens of thousands, I think, on the video I did, Leonardo da Vinci was probably the artist.
Yes, and that's what some people allege. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But unfortunately, Leonardo da Vinci was not born until 1452.
That's a bit of a problem.
Yes, that's a problem. I did have a long debate with an individual who believed this, and actually what I did is I made that into another document, and that's also available on that shroud.com site, my discussion with this individual who alleged that Leonardo da Vinci did it.
But if he wasn't born, I mean, I didn't do any work at all before 1957.
Right. Right.
Right. What about the artistic characteristics? Are they potentially forgeable? Is it in a particular? You know, I can look at a Van Gogh. I'm not an art critic, but I can look at a Van Gogh or a Monet and say, oh yeah, that's almost certainly a Van Gogh. You know, is it attributable to any particular school or artistic style?
Well, that's one of the problems. The shroud is different than almost every other portrayal of Christ in art that's ever been done. First of all, the shroud figure is naked, he's not even wearing a loincloth. And that would have been repugnant and unacceptable for a medieval artist in depicting Christ. So that's problem number one. And then maybe even a more serious problem is all of the artistic pictures of Jesus, and of course there are a lot of them that were done and commissioned by the Catholic Church, for all the way through the 16th century, show him as being nailed to the cross through his hands. And the shroud image, he's nailed through the wrists. Now, when they've done studies of this, scientific studies, they've determined that it isn't possible to support a man's weight on the cross by nailing him through the hands. He had to be nailed through the wrists in order to keep him on the cross. And so whoever the artist was, if the artist was attempting to fake this, they would have to know about this issue and kind of go against all artistic precedent. So this is a problem from the artistic standpoint.
And the image is so anatomically accurate. It's not an artistic style at all, is it? It's like it's so obviously a real human being. Yes,
and by the way, the medical people who have examined the shroud down through the years, that started in 1902, and then has continued with a variety of other medical individuals who have looked at the shroud image, more or less all concur that this was a crucified man who was crucified in exactly the manner that the Gospels tell us that Jesus was crucified. He's whipped. He has contusions on his shoulders, supposedly from carrying the cross. He has whip marks all over him. He's got the blood coming out of his scalp, which were where the crown of thorns was supposedly pressed in his head. It has the wound in his side. the medical and also there's blood evidence. There's blood on the shroud, and they've actually tested it and determined that it actually was blood.
It's an AB of some sort.
Yes, but they've tried to do DNA testing, but they haven't really been very successful with that because the blood is kind of very old and degraded. But one of the interesting facts about the blood is that the blood, of course, was on the shroud apparently first before the image came on, and there's no image under the blood. So the blood inhibited the image from being formed, which is another kind of very difficult thing if you're going to fake it.
Yeah, and the image, of course, is front and back, but there's no image at all under the blood stains.
Correct. And by the way, we should also mention that for those who don't understand what the shroud is, it looks like it's one long piece of cloth, about 14 feet long and about 3 feet wide. Sorry if that's not metric, English measurements. Yeah. But it has both. Basically, what happened is that the shroud man was laid on the bottom of it, and then it was folded over the top. So there's an image both of his front and his back, dorsal and ventral sides.
And there's details of injuries as well. I mean, for example, the nose, the bone in the nose isn't broken, but the cartilage is dislocated.
Correct.
And on the tip of the nose, there's dirt, which is consistent with the dirt in Jerusalem. So consistent with him potentially falling over. There's injuries to his knees, again, with dirt, because he was struggling to carry the cross, and Simon of Cyrene had to take over. There's so many things that are completely consistent, and it's really hard to see how a medieval forger would know all of these details. And the pathological details.
But even if he knew them, to be able to put them in the image, that's the challenge, to make this image look that way.
With the appropriate dirt from Jerusalem.
Correct.
And the pollen from Jerusalem.
Correct. There's actually pollen in the shroud, on the surface of the shroud, that they found from Judea.
Yeah. The characteristics of the cloth itself, it's linen. Am I right in thinking it's in an Egyptian style of linen?
Yes, it's linen that they actually know was originally came from linen, or came from Egypt. I'm sorry. Right. And linen is not a material that you particularly want to use in artistic terms, because it repels water when it's unprepared for working on, and it's a difficult medium. But here now we're getting to the image characteristics. These are perhaps some of the things that really make it almost impossible to fake. There's no pigments or brush strokes on the image. It can't be a painting. There was a guy on the Stirp team. His name was Walter McCrone, who claimed that the image was painted. But the problem is he never personally examined the shroud, and he based his analysis on the fact that he was given these sticky tapes that were put on the shroud and then lifted off, and he had some of the stuff that was on the surface of them, and that's what he analyzed. And what he found was that there was a little bit of pigment on these sticky tapes. But what he didn't realize was this pigment came from artists who had made painted copies of the shroud by laying their materials on the surface of the shroud in order to make the copies. So the image itself, the shroud image, is made up of quote-unquote lines of a little bit darker coloration that's imprinted on the very surface fibers of the cloth. And the lines are approximately 1/100th the width of a human hair. So you imagine the difficulty of somebody trying to paint this.
And there's no seeping into the lower layers, so the blood goes through, but the image is just on the immediate surface of the cloth.
Exactly. So the depth of the image is very, very thin, and only the outer surface of the fiber was discolored. And so and it was essentially due to a change from the analysis of this, from a signal to double electron bonds of some of the carbon atoms on the surface molecules.
In other words, it's singed.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's tinged.
Yeah.
And the shroud has gone through several fires, and if you look at the shroud, you'll see evidence of these fires that it's gone through. But the high temperatures that it went through didn't change the image at all, which would have changed its characteristics if the image was chemically generated. So all of these factors means that it really can't be a painting, it can't be a bleaching, it can't be a rubbing, it can't be a scorching, it can't be a block print.
And the body on the shroud is in a state of rigor mortis that's recognised by morticians and pathologists. The head is down and the knees are up. And
correct.
The image is on parts of the cloth that were not in contact with the body.
Yes.
To me, that means that the image must have gone somehow from the body through air to get to the cloth, because there's non-contact areas. And the only thing I can think of that will do that is radiation.
That's right. That's right. And that's
the only
how the image was produced. We don't know.
We don't know, but given that the image includes parts of the body that could not have been in contact with the cloth, it's hard to see how that very precise anatomical information could get from the body to the cloth via any other means.
Correct.
Radiation does seem to be the only sort of option in town, really. And the fact that the blood was already on the shroud, this proposed radiation would have hit the blood, not gone through the blood, because it only singes the very superficial layer of the shroud. And I think should we mention it we'll mention the photographic bit in a minute, I think. Is it likely that the coins thing, there was possibly coins placed over the eyes? Is that got some credible evidence?
Well, let me get back to the point that you made there about the fact that some of the parts of the body were in contact with the shroud and others were not.
Yes.
The eyes were obviously not, because the eyes are sort of below the level of the cloth, whereas the nose and the knees and so forth were being touched by the cloth.
Yes.
And before we leave that, I should make the point that the image has essentially three-dimensional holographic type qualities, because the darkness of the image is proportional to the distance between the cloth and the body part that it was touching or not touching. So the nose area is shown strongly, but the eyes are less so. And so actually three-dimensional maps have been created using image analyzers that show the face and other parts of the body in bas relief, which is another amazing characteristic of this image. Very hard to fake.
Yeah, I mean, the negative, the fact that this is a negative wasn't discovered until I think 1898 with Secondo Pia, who took the first photograph.
And it wasn't realized that it was a negative image. And
before then, people didn't realize it was negative.
Right, and all of a sudden you realize, hey, now I got a positive from this negative. The negatives he saw were positives, and so it's like, whoa. Now, concepts of negative images were certainly known before this, and so forth, but there really weren't any negative images seen until the invention of photography.
Sure.
And that didn't happen until 1826. And the shroud was first photographed in 1898 as you mentioned, by Secondo Pia. That's correct.
Yeah, and the photo's still available. A very good photograph it is as well for the technology at the time. It's a very impressive photograph, actually.
Yes.
And the 3D characteristics weren't known about. So in sort of 1960s, the 3D characteristics weren't known about until they developed something called a VP8 image analyzer, which was, I think, it was developed by the Apollo program. Is that right?
That may very well be. I'm not sure.
I believe so. I believe so. They were taking pictures of the moon and wanted to know which bits went up and which bits went down, so they could work out a landing site. You're
probably right. Yeah. There you go.
And then it went under this VP8 image analyzer, and all of a sudden, this amazing 3D image
Yes.
pops out.
Amazing 3D image of the Shroud Man. Exactly right.
So you know, the negative nature of the image had been hiding there for 1850 years. The 3D aspect of the image had been hiding there for maybe 1950 years. It's just waiting for the technology to reveal it. And again, so makes it all the more inconceivable that this could have been a medieval forgery, in my view.
Right. Now, let me get back to your issue about the coins.
Yes.
Because we skipped over that.
Yeah, sorry.
The problem with analyzing these coins and showing that they're definitely coins is the fact that the eye areas are quite faint, given the fact that they were not being the shroud didn't touch them, and so it seems to be that way, and it seems like those who have looked at it very carefully claim that it was a Roman lepton minted around the time of Pontius Pilate, but I'm not sure that that's all that well established because of the images. It's pretty faint.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. But certainly closing the eyes of the dead is standard practice. I learned to lay out bodies when I was a first year student psychiatric nurse when I was 18 years old.
Really? Wow.
Oh yeah. And
Wow.
my charge nurse told me how to do it. He got some cotton wool buds, and then he wet them,
Wow.
closed the eyes, and put them over the eyes, and that way the eyelids will stay shut until the rigor mortis sets in. Then you don't have this staring corpse if the relatives want to see it. And you must also remember at that stage to put their false teeth in,
Oh, dear, yes.
because later on, when the rigor mortis sets in, you can't get the false teeth in, which I'm sure you didn't want to know, and no one watching wanted to know. But
Wow.
that's what I learned when I was learning to lay out bodies when I was 18. Anyway,
Okay.
so image characteristics. It's got foreshortening in it. What does this mean artistically, foreshortening in the image?
Well, foreshortening was an artistic technique that was developed in the Renaissance times. This is a little bit after the 1300s. So after the shroud was alleged to have been produced, if you believe the carbon dating. And what it is, it's a way to realistically render 3D objects on a 2D surface. Mm. So, for example, when you're looking at a building or you're looking at somebody up in the sky, their feet are going to be a little bit larger than their head.
Sure.
And so the concept of foreshortening is an artistic concept that allows you to accurately represent them in a painting or in a drawing. And given the fact that there's foreshortening in the shroud itself, because the shroud man's knees are slightly bent and his head is bent, it means that the image has foreshortening in it. So those who would see that this or claim that this is something painted or made during the medieval times would have to explain how it could have been done in an era before foreshortening had been invented.
Yeah, and before photography had been invented. And the rigor mortis is consistent with a dead body slumped on a cross, so the knees would be bent, the head would fall forward. It's gruesomely consistent with what you would expect to see from a victim of Roman crucifixion. I mean, there's also some evidence that the shoulders might have been dislocated. I mean, the pathology on this is horrific beyond description.
Yeah, another factor is the fact that the nails to the wrist cause the thumbs to retract, and that's another factor, the similar factor to that.
It's the damage to the median nerve, and
yes,
and of course
correct.
The median nerve is motor, causing the thumb to retract, but it's also sensory. Mm-hmm. The Romans knew how to torture people.
Yes, they did. They did.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about the negative image properties which is there, and we've talked about the 3D properties. Let's just maybe recapitulate the blood. I think we know the blood is blood group AB. A bit disappointing that the DNA, I suppose there's so much DNA contamination because throughout the medieval period, we know that people used to kiss the shroud.
Yes.
So it's going to be full of contamination.
Yes. Correct.
But I do believe that there has been some studies. I'm just going from memory here, but well, for sure, blood, of course, is red and white cells. The red cells contain no nuclei, but the white cells do. And I believe studies have been done that indicate that the blood has XY characteristics.
Yes. And by the way, it's also interesting that typically when you have a cadaver and the blood comes out, remember the New Testament talks about the fact there's both blood and water or serum.
This is the spear wound after death.
Yes, both the serum of the blood essentially and the red blood cells themselves, and there's a separation of that that pathologists have noted. That's again part of the accuracy of the shroud image. That you would not, that the forger perhaps would not have been able to know about.
So basically, there's two types of blood on the shroud. There's blood that was shed during life, where the plasma and the cells are mixed in, although there is some chromatography effect of the plasma, but there's also blood that was shed after death, post-mortem blood, because when a body dies, we get what we call lividity. So the white part, the top part of the body goes pale, the bottom part of the body goes bruised as the blood settles down via gravity. And if there's separation of the red cells and the serum, then you can get that with a centrifuge. but given that wasn't the case, it looks like this is post-mortem blood, and that's consistent with the account from the Gospels of blood and water. And yes, the water part was probably a combination of pleural fluid and maybe some pericardial fluid as well. And it looks like the way that the wound was inflicted on the right side but going through to the left was a standard way for Romans to bring about death quickly. It seems that this may well have been part of Roman military training. To make sure someone's dead, it's like a standard blow. So it's just one jab onto the next one, and then you know for sure.
Right. Make sure they're dead, right.
That you know for sure that they're dead. It's like a standard. I know special forces probably go and grab someone's nose and mouth and stick a thing in the brainstem. You know, there's a standard way that militaries throughout history have had of doing this, gruesome though that is, and that was probably. There's other evidence that was probably the Roman way of doing it. The Shroud of Turin is either the most awesome and instructive relic of Jesus Christ in existence, or it's the most ingenious, most unreliable, clever product of the human mind and hand on record.
Yes.
I would agree with that. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and there's another guy that was on the Stirp team. He concluded that it would be miraculous if it was a forgery.
Yes.
By the way, there is one other scientific area that we should mention,
please,
before we leave the scientific area, and that is the photographic nature of the shroud.
Yes.
And that's perhaps one of the areas where it's most possible that it could have been faked. Okay, if it was possible to fake it.
Yep.
Because the shroud image is more or less quote unquote photographic in nature, rather than artistic.
Yes.
There's no style to it, no artistic style. But here's the problem with it being a photograph. It lacks any sharp edges and outlines of a photograph or a painting. Because when you take a photograph of somebody, you'll see sharp edges at their shirt or their head or whatever. Yeah. The shroud doesn't have, because it sort of melts away at the edge. And another problem is the shroud image lacks any color differentiation. The entire, like I said before, when you look at it, and it's not very impressive, it's kind of a uniform sepia yellow tone to the shroud. So this is why some have alleged that it was a medieval photograph produced by Leonardo da Vinci. And Leonardo da Vinci did invent something that's called a camera obscura, which was a device that allowed you to, if you put a pinhole in a piece of paper or in a piece of cardboard, it would then project, and you put that in the dark area, it would project light or an inverse of the video, or not the video, the light, whatever your light source, on the backside inside the box.
Yep. A bit like a big pinhole camera, really.
Exactly, a pinhole camera.
Yeah.
But some people have alleged that that's how it was done. But the problem is that it would require a cadaver or a super accurate statue of Christ to be created, as well as the use of photography, which involves, of course, photographic chemicals, centuries before photography was invented. And then here's the most serious problem with the photographic issue, is that there's no silvering on the shroud. And silvering, as we know, is what makes the image on a photograph possible. And then to top it off, Leonardo da Vinci kept very, very detailed notes on all of his inventions. And there's no record of da Vinci ever attempting such a work. So.
And if you were going to do that, you'd probably use a material, as you say, that was slightly more photographic than linen, which is not a photographic material in any way, shape, or form.
There was a guy who actually attempted this. I forget the man's name, but again, you can read about this on shroud.com. He attempted to actually reproduce this, but he indicated that it required a lot of exposures. You had to expose the head, and then the body, and then the feet. And I'm not exactly sure how you're going to get all these together and make them all work. Given current technology, let alone what the technology was available back in Leonardo's day. So
yeah, but there's no mismatch. Like the body is not misaligned to the head or anything. It's
correct.
It's all anatomically perfect. So just to conclude that scientific part, Rich, I think we can either say that the shroud is genuinely the shroud of a crucified man.
Correct. That's what it's. That's what I think most people would conclude after they've considered all of this evidence that we just discussed.
Yeah.
All these characteristics.
Leaving the formation of many men have been crucified, many men have been killed and murdered, but no one else has produced an image like this.
Correct. There's no image on any other shroud or any other burial cloth.
It's utterly unique.
Correct.
I have seen a body imprint from someone that just died. A perfect handprint, like a perfect handprint. What had happened was the person who deceased was actually lying on their hand, and bile had leaked out of a drain in the body, and the bile had formed a perfect image of the hand.
Interesting.
On the mattress, but of course that was. It's just, in a 45 years of nursing, that's the only time I've seen that. But no other image like this exists. So it's either a miraculous image of a crucified man, consistent with the scriptural accounts of Jesus of Nazareth, or it's a miraculous forgery.
Correct.
So you can take your pick. It's either a miracle or a miracle.
Anything else, right?
Yeah.
A miracle one way or the other.
Yeah, it really is quite phenomenal. Right, let's go and look now at some biblical or historical challenges. So, is this consistent? Is this cloth consistent with the descriptions of the burial cloths in the New Testament accounts?
Well, I mean, the New Testament doesn't really talk about burial cloths aside from this one. But if you look at the Jewish customs of burial at the time, it is at variance with this. And so the Shroud of Turin is taken as evidence both for and against the shroud's authenticity. Some people look at it and say, well, people at the time weren't buried like this in this kind of shroud. And other people will say, well, if people weren't buried like this, then if the shroud was a fake, why would the forger ever start with this from the gospel narratives and produce an image like this? So my possible explanation for why the shroud is the way it is that the burial had to be done in haste. If you remember the whole story, after the death of Christ, and Joseph of Arimathea comes to Pilate to get the body, and this, of course, is sometime in the afternoon.
This is the afternoon of the Friday, the Jewish Passover.
Correct, and of course, Sabbath, Saturday is the Sabbath, and the Sabbath begins at sundown. So they wanted to get this, and this, of course, was the Passover, which was a special Sabbath, and they wanted to get this burial done before the Sabbath started. So there was only two guys, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. They hurry up and they bury Christ in Joseph's tomb. And probably Joseph grabbed a cloth that he had available, which may not have been an actual shroud that would be typically used to bury somebody. And they didn't have time to wash the body either. And that would typically have been done in the case of a burial.
But they had to get all this done before.
Yeah.
We imagine them doing this at dusk on the Friday.
Exactly. So they're trying to try and get this all finished and done. To before the Sabbath started, because what happens is if you don't do this, then you were ritually unclean.
Which would have been unthinkable to good Jews like Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea.
Well, you have to remember that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea were both members of the Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
This is the Jewish intelligentsia, the high order of Jewish scribes at that time. So, they were very conscious of this sort of thing.
Now, there's another cloth known as the Sudarium of Oviedo.
Yes.
What is it?
Well, this is a cloth that was it's stained with blood, and it was alleged to be the cloth that covered the face of Christ after his crucifixion, and it may have been what we call the napkin, or that's referred to in the Gospel of John in John chapter 20, and the Sudarium was brought. Actually, it has a much more detailed history, not much more definitive history than the shroud does itself. It was brought to Spain in the 7th century, and it's been kept in the Spanish town of Oviedo ever since that time.
So it's got a provenance going back to the 600s.
Yes, way, way, way back. And the Sudarium in 1999 was studied, and the team examining it concluded that the Sudarium and the shroud both covered the same head. The bloodstains match up.
And they were both AB blood, from what I remember.
Yes, yes.
So I think the background here is that when Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea went to take Christ off the cross, not to cover his head would have been disrespectful in Jewish culture.
Yes.
So the head had to be covered. So you can imagine them putting this cloth on while he was still on the cross, and then taking him down and transferring him to the tomb. And I think it's the Gospel of John that records that the headcloth was left separately from the shroud. There's no image on the Sudarium, is there, on the headcloth?
No, there's no image.
But that's consistent with the idea that the headcloth would have been taken off when they got to the tomb. It would have been disgraceful for the face to be shown in public when it went from the cross to the tomb, so they covered the face. But then when they put the body into the shroud, that would be taken off and folded up neatly. And another nice touch there is when a dinner guest of this time was nipping out to the loo, they would fold their napkin neatly, meaning they were going to return.
Right, exactly.
Whereas if they just chucked it on the table, that means, I'm off, mate, Make what you want of that. It's just that's just me talking out loud.
Okay, there you go.
Now, a more serious issue to my mind is Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus took, from what I remember, is about 50 pounds of myrrhs and aloes to anoint the body with. I'm a bit confused about that, because we know that the women on the first day of the week, which would be the Sunday morning, took spices to anoint the body with. So why would they have had to do that if Joseph Arimathea and Nicodemus had already put myrrh and aloes on the body. I mean, did they run out of time, or do you think was that actually used? The myrrh and aloes actually used?
Well, we don't know. We don't really know. It mentions the fact that these two guys did take the myrrh and aloes with them.
Yeah.
And presumably, and of course, this was very customary to put myrrh. Myrrh was used very extensively in Old Testament times,
Yeah.
all throughout the Arab world.
Yeah.
Actually, it was used also as a because they didn't wash very often, because they didn't have very much water, and so there's a lot of body smells.
For sure.
And so they would use myrrh and some of these spices to cover up body smells, BO and stuff like that. So they would use myrrh to cover the smell of the dead body, and I'm not sure exactly why the women thought it was necessary, but usually this was typically washing and anointing the body was usually a female thing.
I mean, the women would have presumably been told by Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea that the body hadn't been washed.
Yes, and who knows what they said to these women? We don't know. That's not
if there were myrrh and aloes on there, then because the body had to be washed as part of Jewish culture, then they would have had to been removed and fresh anointings put on, presumably. So it does make sense. But to allow the body to be buried without being washed would have been unconscionable.
Right. And especially the body of Christ, where they were respected.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyone that was respected, but yeah, especially the followers it would have been unthinkable that they would leave the body unwashed, but they couldn't wash it on the Sabbath. But there are some accounts from the shroud was in Constantinople, and some people did say it smelled of myrrh. There's actually written records of that, so.
Yes.
But there again, it could have been washed at many times.
Right. So as we'll see when we cover the historical account, the shroud did come to Constantinople at some point. It was kept in the imperial relic treasury, and there is an account of the shroud being smelling of myrrh. But we don't know if the shroud is washed or dipped in oils, and whether that myrrh smell would have been removed. But in any case, now there apparently is no odor through the shroud.
No, and people that were custodians of the shroud at different periods of history would have treated it in ways that was respectful for their culture at the time. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that might have involved washing it. Sometimes it might have involved anointing it. We don't fully understand these things. Mm-hmm. The height of the man on the shroud seems to be, it's hard to tell because of the bent posture, but estimates vary between 5'11" and 6'1". Bit tall for men of the time, for Jewish men of the time.
Yes, and that's an objection to some people. Some people see this as an objection because most of the guys at that time were shorter. But the Bible, as most literature at that time indicated, it really doesn't detail the appearance of Jesus, and it doesn't tell how tall he was, and it doesn't say this about anybody. About how tall anybody was.
No, we don't know what Paul looked like. Was he bald? Did he have hair?
Exactly.
We don't know what any of the apostles looked like, or indeed any of the women. We know nothing of the physical appearances.
Correct.
Apart from people with leprosy, for example, where it's relevant.
Right. So this picture of Solomon, this popular picture of Christ that Solomon did, may not be what Jesus looked like, other than using the shroud as a model.
Yeah. We might come on to the artistic history as well, which is quite interesting. Concern has been expressed about the formation of the image in regard to the way that the body was wrapped in the cloth.
Yes.
What's the objection there, Rich?
Well, this is one of the most serious objections in my mind, because the cloth would presumably have gone over not only on the top of the body but also over the shoulders. But there's nothing on the cloth that has anything on the shoulder sides. It only shows the image on the top of the body and the bottom of the body. And so presumably the cloth was rested on the sides. maybe not was not wrapped, but at least it would rest on the sides. But there's no image on the sides of the cloth. So that is that people have raised that as a challenge to the authenticity of the shroud.
Mm. If we go back to the radiation idea, there's many things about the possible radiation hypothesis that we don't understand in terms of radiation directionality.
Correct. And it may be that if it was indeed radiation, that all the radiation was unidirectional, did not go off in all directions. Mm. So again, this is another argument from silence that's saying, it shoulda, coulda, woulda gone in all directions, and why didn't it have this? But we don't know for sure exactly how the resurrection worked or what exactly caused this radiation, if it was indeed radiation, to occur, and how it worked.
Mm. So near where I live in the north of England, there's an archaeological site on the Roman wall called Vindolanda.
Okay.
And the found organic remains there in anaerobic conditions under clay, writing tablets, sandals, belts, pieces of cloth. And I can understand that because it's completely anaerobic. There's no oxygen at all. But how credible is it that linen could survive for 2,000 years in a fully aerobic environment?
Well, that is a challenge, and that's another challenge that people have raised. However, it was actually, as we'll see when we get to the history, that it was actually put in an anaerobic environment for quite a while during its early years, for quite a number of hundreds of years. But there are many instances of ancient fabrics and textiles that have survived, and even some of them have some of the color that was there intact. And there's actually instances of ancient Egyptian Coptic textiles that have been discovered in tombs, and dating either around the time of Christ and sometimes even before. So even though it does seem amazing that a shroud would survive all down through the centuries since the time of Christ, it looks like it is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Personally,
I've seen textiles that are 1,000 years older than the shroud. I've seen 3,000-year-old textiles wrapping mummies in the British Museum. Anyone can walk in and see it.
Exactly.
They are there. I've seen those bandages with my own eyes.
Right.
They're in a glass case, but they are 3,000 years old, and there's no question about. Right. In fact, there's examples that are older than 3,000 years old.
From mummies, yes, very true.
Yeah. Shall we do a bit of a chronology of the shroud? The idea that to try and construct a provenance is difficult, and as we've said, we can't be definitive before about 1355. But there is a highly credible chronology of the history of the shroud, isn't there? That goes basically from the time of the crucifixion. Yes, there is, and we should allege here that for those that doubt the shroud, we cannot again prove anything historical. No. So what we're doing here is we're looking at historical evidence that what people have said and written, and that's the best we can do. But there is a consistent, coherent narrative, a linear narrative.
But there is a narrative. There is a narrative.
Yeah.
So if we look at it, the shroud starts in around 33 A.D.
Yeah.
Jesus is crucified, buried by Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea.
Yep.
It was his cloth and his tomb. So Jesus then rises from the dead, and when the disciples enter the empty tomb, they see the burial cloths according to the Gospels. However, we don't know what happened to those burial cloths. There's nothing in the New Testament that tells us what happened to them. Presumably, they may have been given back to Joseph of Arimathea, or possibly to some of the other disciples.
I mean, there is a disciple that went into the tomb who saw and believed.
Yes.
Can't quite remember which one it was now, but...
Well, that was John.
It was John, yeah.
So Peter comes first.
That's right. Peter and John were running, weren't they? That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah. I wonder if Joseph went on to be buried in the same tomb. It doesn't matter. It's an irrelevance, but it's just curious.
Well, there are at least two different tomb locations in Jerusalem where. And because the Catholic Church has alleged that the Church of the Annunciation was where Jesus' tomb was.
Church of the Holy Sepulchre, yeah.
Oh, Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, and then there's also the Garden Tomb.
The General Gordon site. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've been to those. Frankly, I think the Garden Tomb seems to make a little bit more sense, but again, there's no proving it one way or the other.
There is that really uncanny Golgotha skull on the side of the hill, isn't there?
There is. It looks really weird.
It really does look like a skull.
So you've been there too?
Yeah. I've been to both sites, and
okay.
Yeah, I have told a story of my account of the Garden Tomb, but I'm going to skip on that for now. I did have a strange experience. I'll tell you about it briefly.
Okay.
It was 4:30. I was in the Garden Tomb. I was 30 yards from the tomb. It was about to close down for the day, and I saw a flash inside the tomb.
Cool.
And I thought, flash photography. And I thought, but it's not quite right. So I fixed my eyes on the tomb. I walked straight towards it. Didn't take my eyes off it. Went in, and there was no one there. And I remember the way the flash curved round the doorway. And I thought, just a minute, John, just a minute. Get this clear in your head. So I went through the whole thing in my head. I was 44 years old. I was in Jerusalem. I was on my own. I did see this flash. I went through it all. And I know I saw that flash. Now, whether that was an hallucination, I don't know. But my perceptual system saw that flash. It's not a fake memory. I went through it at the time in great detail. Now, having looked at the historical details, I think the evidence for the Constantine's mother, who was it, Helena?
Yes, she was the one that established the church.
Yeah, I think her evidence is probably slightly stronger, but and the evidence that the Garden Tomb predates the New Testament era is fairly strong. But that's my experience. Make what you want of it. I still don't know what to make of it, but
okay.
There you go. Anyway, rapidly passing on to more concrete areas. So it seems that there was something called the image of Edessa, in Edessa, yes, which is in southern Turkey, around by about 57 AD. So within, a decade or two of the crucifixion.
Well, it's actually a little bit before that.
Right.
There's a King Abgar V of Edessa.
Yes.
And he had a disease. I think he had a foot disease.
A what?
And
what disease?
A disease of the feet.
Blood disease, yeah.
Yeah, and he what he did is he appealed. He had heard about this miracle working Christ, and so he sends to Jerusalem. Edessa is I'd say, 200, 300 miles from Jerusalem. Edessa is in southern Turkey.
Yeah, so it's 4, 5, 6 day journey, really.
Correct. And so he requests that something be brought to him to heal him. And the story is, this is backed up by documents. I don't remember the names of them now. If you look at my articles, I can reference them. But supposedly the shroud was brought to Edessa by either Thomas or Thaddeus, who were two of the disciples of Christ, at the request of this king. And he was miraculously healed of his disease, presumably by the power of the shroud. So some people would, of course, challenge that. But what they can't challenge is that Edessa became a Christian city.
That's archaeological and written record. That is known for sure.
Yes, so that's indisputable.
Yeah.
And I forget the name of the book again, but there's a book that was written by Edessa, the city of Christ, that records this. And there was a mosaic tile that was made of the face of the shroud that was known as the Keramion, and this was placed over the city gate. And this was often done over city gates. They would place a statue or an image of the city god. And so or the deity or the divinity that basically protected the city.
Yeah.
Yes. And so when you came to the city, you would bow down or give homage in some sort, or salute or whatever this image. So the Keramion was the image of Christ, and this was placed over the city gate in place of any kind of pagan symbol. Now, what happens is that the shroud in this tile, may have been the model used for the future pictures of Christ, because eventually what happens is the people in Syria became the main Christian artists that depict Christ. The 57 date that you referred to, what happened was that Manu the sixth became the king of Edessa, and he reverted the city to paganism.
Right.
And so the shroud and the Karamian were hidden in the city walls to protect them from destruction. And apparently the location, they were forgotten. And so the shroud and the Karamian, they basically were stored in the city walls for hundreds of years.
Right, so it would be around from about 38 to 57, and then it was hidden away.
Correct.
In 57, and it was hidden away for nearly 500 years in the walls.
Correct. Around 525, there was a flood. Edessa had been flooded, and the walls had partially been broken down. And so, in repairing the walls, excuse me, in repairing the walls, the shroud and the Karamian were rediscovered. And then, a few years later, probably about 20 years later, Edessa was besieged by a Persian army. And the shroud was brought down to where they were trying to defend against the Persians. And basically, they were trying to set fire to this Persian siege works. And they couldn't, it was all wet, so they couldn't set it fire. And then they brought the shroud down there and prayed to the shroud. And purportedly, they were able to start the fire. And the siege work was burned. And the Persian army, apparently, a number of the attackers were destroyed or killed by this fire. And so the Persians left. And so the shroud or the Karamian were said to have saved the city.
Which may or may not be true, but the point is the shroud was still in Edessa at that time.
Correct. And they thought it had. Okay.
Yeah.
They attributed this to the power of this relic.
Sure.
And so following this, they constructed a church called the Hagia Sophia, which is named after the one in Constantinople, to house and venerate the shroud and the Karamian. And the shroud was shown in public every Easter, but it was shown kind of very in an air of secrecy. You couldn't really see it very well, and mystery. So people didn't really understand it very well, what was happening there.
So to summarize that, 38, the shroud went to Edessa. 57, the shroud was hidden in the walls. 525, after a flood there was rebuilding, the shroud was rediscovered. 544, Edessa successfully repelled the attack of the Persian forces.
Yes. And the shroud was attributed to be the thing that saved them.
Yep.
And they built the church, and they venerated the shroud, and it was shown in public.
And when we know there was something called the image of Edessa.
Correct.
That was present in this copy of the Hagia Sophia church in Edessa.
Now the shroud at that time was referred to, and particularly back in the days of King Abgar, as the Mandalion. So there's been some dispute as to whether or not the Mandalion and the shroud were two different things. But I think more or less the conclusion that people have drawn is that the Mandalion and the shroud were essentially the same object.
And the other thing that's really quite convincing there is if you look at the pictures of Christ in art, of which there are only a few, in, say, the 100s, 200s, 300s, 400s, Christ has got a very Romanesque appearance, short hair, clean shaven. But then in the St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, there's an image of Christ that goes back actually to the mid 550s. It's 6th century, and that's got the characteristic shroud type appearances that we see in images of Christ after that period of time. So it's very consistent with the rediscovery of the shroud in Edessa in 525. Within 25, 50 years after that, there was this image painted that's now in the St. Catherine's Monastery, which did exist at that time, of course.
Right. And Syriac artists became the main source of Christian art. And of course, the Byzantines later on made many icons, and they are basically modeled on either the Shroud or the Keramion.
Yeah.
In terms of the way Christ is pictured.
Yeah, and the detail there is quite revealing. I mean, just for example, the beard has got a gap in the middle of it.
Yep.
Because Isaiah said they plucked my beard, as if part of it had been taken out.
Shroud image, basically, it matches the Shroud image.
Yeah, and I can't remember the details, but you can look at points on the Shroud and points on these early images, like the one in St. Catherine's, and you find out there's multiple areas of correlation between the two, which is, again, it's hard to see that these images are not based on the Shroud. It really is quite difficult to see that, and bearing in mind this is in the 6th century.
And by the way, I should point out here that there have been people who have analyzed exactly what you're talking about. They've analyzed the images of the icons and compared it to the Shroud, and point to a lot of the significances in the image, the similarities in the images.
Which is strong evidence that the Shroud existed in the 500s.
Correct.
Now, the Roman Empire divided into the Eastern and Western Empire, from what I remember. The Eastern Empire was centered on... Western Empire was taken over by the Goths and the barbarians, and basically my people, I suppose, took over the Roman Empire, the Roman side. But the Eastern Roman Empire continued on, and it's called Byzantium, headquartered in Constantinople. And there was a Byzantine emperor wanted the image of Edessa, and he sent an army to Edessa.
Yes.
About 944.
Yes, and the Byzantine Empire was periodically threatened by the Turks, and so they had apparently heard about this thing in Edessa that had protected them, and so they sent an army there to conquer Edessa. Edessa made a deal and said, "Listen, we'll give you the Shroud if you leave us alone."
Well, if the alternative's being killed, I think that's probably the whole city being killed. I don't think you mess around with Byzantine emperors.
Correct. So they said, "All right, deal." So the Shroud was given to people from Byzantium. It was received with great ceremony, paraded through the city, and sermons were preached. We actually have a copy of the sermon that was preached on that day by a priest by the name of Gregory Referendus, and the Shroud was put in the imperial relic treasury, and we have records of that
in Constantinople.
And what it was folded up, so only the face was visible. It was put like in a reliquary. So normally you would only see the face. I forget now if this was done in Byzantium or just in Edessa. What they would do on Easter time is they would gradually reveal the whole Shroud, one step at a time or one day at a time, until you saw the whole thing. And it was periodically presented to private audiences in Constantinople.
Yeah. And of course, whether the Shroud does have mystical powers to protect cities, of course, is an irrelevance. The point is that this is the historical movement of this image of Edessa.
That's what they believe.
The only debate really is whether this is the Shroud of Turin or not, but there's a lot of indications that it is from the art.
Correct.
So the people of Constantinople were foolish enough to invite knights in from the Fourth Crusade, who they thought were Christian brothers and turned out to be a bunch of thugs. 1204?
Well, yeah, and if you read the history of the Crusades, it's very interesting history. It's amazing that the Crusaders ever conquered Jerusalem in the first place.
Well, got that far. Yeah,
they got that far.
Yeah.
That's another story.
The amount of drinking that took place on the way.
Well, it wasn't just the drinking. The main problem, and this is true in 1204 as well, they never had a united leadership.
Yeah.
And so they had all these groups were sort of went their own way, and the leadership would fight with each other. And so there was a complicated politics. The people from the West didn't really trust the people from the East, and so they wound up when they came in the Fourth Crusade to Constantinople, which was usually the launching off point of getting down to Jerusalem. Yeah. Rather than actually going on to Jerusalem, they conquered Constantinople, and they sacked the city, and the shroud was taken by the Crusaders.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is the start. 1205, 1206, 1207 was the start of the Holy Grail stories.
Yeah, go on.
And we can maybe talk about this later. I don't want to, interrupt this thing, but there was a guy who was a priest. A priest of one of the knights who was from the time of from the 1204 Crusade. When this guy got back home to France, that's when these stories started. The stories about the Holy Grail and the blood of Christ, and Joseph of Arimathea catching the blood of Christ through the Grail and so forth. So. I personally think the shroud had something to do with the Grail. We can talk about that later.
But of course, the shroud did catch the blood, didn't it?
It did. The shroud has the blood of Christ on it.
If it's genuine, yeah.
Correct.
Absolutely, it's blood of a crucified man, for sure. Okay, right. 1204 to 1355, things go a bit vague, don't they, at that stage?
Yes, because what happens is that the shroud is taken by the Crusaders, and there is some documentary evidence of what happened, but it's not necessarily conclusive, and doesn't cover the whole period.
It looks like the Templars took it to Athens, the Knights Templar.
Well, it was taken by this knight, Othan de la Roche, and I believe he was a knight. He was a Templar knight from the Burgundy region of France.
Yeah.
And he actually he was granted this as a result of his participation in the Crusades. He was granted to be the Lord of Athens in Greece. And so the shroud was probably brought to Greece for a while.
And there is Greek pollen on it, I believe.
Yeah, that may be. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
But you may have that may be true. Eventually what happens is the shroud comes to Besançon, which is the capital of Burgundy.
So modern day France.
Back to France. Yeah, and Othan de la Roche, I think he died a little while after that, and his I think he was buried back in France. So I think all of his remains and everything comes back to France, to Burgundy.
And of course, a lot of the Crusaders were Franks, the groups that later became French and German. Yeah,
exactly, they were. In fact, the lead guy who became the king of Jerusalem was from Belgium, actually. He was from, or at that time it was France, really.
So anyway, the Balian, yeah.
Yes. Anyway, in any case, the shroud eventually becomes the property of a Knight Templar whose name is Geoffrey de Charnay.
And this is round about when? This is around about 13...
It's around about the 1340s to the 1350s.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, he had been captured by the English.
Yeah.
He was a Templar, and he was also very, very high up in the he was a high counselor to King John of France, and I think John may have actually ransomed him from England.
John the Second.
Participated in John the Second, and so he builds this chapel in his province, which is Liry, France. I've actually been there to see this chapel to commemorate his rescue. And then he and his wife Jean displayed the shroud to the public in 1355 in this chapel.
Yeah.
And they mint these medallions, some of which have been found. They found it, by the way, when they drained the Seine River in Paris.
It was in the mud, wasn't it?
It was in the mud. And they found, I think, one or two of them. And this was minted during that time to commemorate the display of the shroud.
Which was typical of pilgrimages during that time.
Yes.
There would be a memento issued.
Right, and of course, the benefit to whoever owned the shroud or over owned the church was that people would come there and pay money to see this thing.
Yeah.
So this is again this whole artifact thing.
Yeah, so I mean, very often that would be apostles' toenails and other ludicrous things, but this one is different.
Correct. Or it was pieces of the true cross, things like that.
Okay, so let's go on. After that, we're talking about documented history, really, aren't we? So from 1355, we're virtually, well, as certain as we can be of the provenance.
Right. Now in 1389, this is another example of things that people have used to basically debunk the shroud. There was this bishop. His name was Darcis, Pierre Darcis, who was Bishop of Troyes, or Troyes, as it's pronounced in French. And he wrote what's known as the Darcis Memorandum, in which he complained to the Pope that the shroud in Leary was a painting and a fake. And but what was finally determined was that he had never actually seen the shroud. And he was jealous of Leary because what had happened was there had been an accident in his cathedral that had destroyed his relics, so people weren't coming to visit his cathedral in Troyes. And so he's saying, all these people are going over to Leary, and I'm missing all this money. So this memorandum has sort of been questioned and debunked as basically thinking that the shroud has been forged.
So he wasn't very happy that the money was going to Leary rather than Troyes.
Yeah, and by the way, Clement actually forbade him from actually attacking the shroud and gave new authorizations to display the shroud later on.
Interesting.
So it seemed to be that Clement thought that the shroud was actually the shroud of Christ.
The Pope at the time, yeah.
The Pope at the time, Pope Clement the Seventh.
Yeah, and then it's passed down through the generations to Margaret de Chardonnay. What does she come into the story?
Well, she's the granddaughter of Geoffrey, and she allowed the cloth, which of course was still a part of their family, to be viewed on a number of occasions during the period of 1400 to 1453. And then in 1454, she sold the shroud to Duke Louis of Savoy. And the sale of the shroud was actually detailed in a document that's in the Paris archives. So we have the detail of the shroud being sold in 1464. And then later on, there was a history of the Savoy family that recorded that Louis's acquisition of the shroud was his greatest achievement. So here you have more documentary evidence of the shroud, in that period of time.
And then it was passed on down through various generations of the Savoys, periodically displayed.
Right. And the Savoys actually got involved with the politics of Italy. They later became the kings of Italy. They built they built churches. They brought the shroud with them. They displayed it, and finally the shroud was moved to Turin, Italy, in 1578. And then in 1694, the shroud was placed in the Guarini Chapel in Turin, where it remains even today.
So it had been in Turin since 1578, and it's been in its current home since 1694. Yeah.
Right.
But definitely in Turin since 1578.
Right. So a few other significant dates. These really don't affect the shroud itself, but significant to the scientific analysis of the shroud. 1898 was the first photograph of the shroud, when it was noticed that it was a negative image. 1902 was the first medical examination of the shroud that was done at the Sorbonne by Yves de Laga and his associates. By the way, when he looked at the shroud, he said his conclusion was that this had to be Jesus.
Yes.
Or it had to at least be a man that was crucified in exactly the same way that Jesus had been.
Either way, it's horrific, isn't it? Either Christ was crucified as the Gospels and the shroud indicate, or the only way to fake this would be to crucify another man.
Correct.
In exactly the same way, because the medical details, for example, the flow of blood on the arm
Right. Exactly.
was characteristic of that which would be the crucifixion,
Right.
the movement of the body to try and facilitate breathing
Right.
when the arms are in an upright position. And I think by 1902, anatomy was a well elucidated subject by that time.
Oh yes, yes, very well elucidated.
Yeah.
So then the shroud was actually reviewed a number of times, but in 1978, the Catholic Church finally allowed a team in to really do an extensive series of tests on the shroud, and that's when they determined the characteristics of the image, how fine the image was, that it only covered the first layer of the linen. And so they demonstrated that it really could not have been an artwork. It wasn't a painting. It wasn't a photograph. Or any of these other artistic techniques. Then you have. Then we forward to 1983.
Yep.
Umberto II, who was the ex-king of Italy, and he was still the legal owner of the shroud because he was part of the Savoy family. He died.
Oh, right. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
And in his will, he bequeathed the shroud to the Pope.
Yeah.
And to the successors of the Pope, essentially to the Catholic Church, to the Vatican. But he stipulated that it had to remain in Turin. So the shroud is still in Turin to this day. Then, of course, we have the 1988 dating, which we discussed already. And then in 2002, this is a very interesting occurrence that happened here. A man by the name of Philip Dayvault, who was very interested in early artifacts of Syrian origin, comes to this museum in Edessa and finds down in their archives in the basement what seems to be the Karamian, which was this. The Karamian again was this. It was like a mosaic face that was done of this shroud picture, and put up at the time in Edessa, way back. And by Edgar.
Like the deity that guards the city, sort of thing, as the culture was at the time. Yeah.
Yes, and also the Karamian may have been the model for the artwork that was done, either the shroud or the Karamian. And then the kind of the latest thing that's relevant to the shroud was 2022. When threads of the shroud were dated with this new X-ray technology that I was referred to, wax. And dated it to the time of Christ. And so that sort of includes the historical analysis.
Yeah, and when the Pope allows, there's lots of tests just waiting to be done. I know there's people chomping at the bit to do further tests. Hopefully they will be allowed. So, looking straight at the listener, what do you make of this? It's not the sort of thing that can be poo-pooed or say, oh, never mind, let's go for a drink.
Right.
It demands an opinion.
Right.
So, any thinking person has to give an opinion on this.
Right. The bottom line question is, what produced the image in the shroud?
Yeah.
And why have no other burial cloths in the history of the world ever had a similar image imprinted on them?
Yep.
And that's a question that any intelligent person, a thinking person, has got to answer.
Yep. Yep. And I've certainly never seen anything like it, nor any medic I've ever talked to seen anything like it, nor any mortician I've ever talked to seen anything like it. Or is there anything else in the whole history of archaeology that's anything?
Correct.
Anything like it. Rich, that was a incredible, concise. Well, I say concise. It's an hour and a half, but I think we did pretty well to cover it in that time. It really is a challenge, and you get the feeling. I kind of get the feeling that this is, there's something in the scriptures called the image of the evidence of Jonah, isn't there? The idea that there's things about the shroud that could only be discovered with the technology of the time, and if the shroud is genuine, things that will only be discovered in the future with the technology of the time, with improving technology. And if this image is genuinely the image of Christ, then that presents a challenge to all of mankind, doesn't it?
It does. And although we need to repeat this, we can't prove this scientifically, prove that this is the burial cloth of Christ. I believe that the evidence for the authenticity of the shroud is overwhelming. I don't see how it can be disputed, frankly.
No, as you say, if it's a forgery, it's a miracle in its own right.
Right.
It really is the most amazing document, and the consistency with the Sudarium of Oviedo is also really quite interesting. That both should survive. On that note, I'm just going through all this again. It just blows you away every time, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. You look at this and you're kind of in awe of saying, "Whoa,
yeah,
whoa, it's amazing."
Yeah.
And then what's even more amazing is to consider not only the birth of Christ but the death of Christ. And the Bible says that Jesus is the designer of creation; he's the King of Kings. But his birth, we don't even know exactly when he was born. We think now that it was maybe 2 BC.
2 or 3, probably, yeah.
Yeah, that's in debate.
Well, Herod the Great actually died in about 4 BC, so it could have been even a year or two before that. Yes,
so that's up for grabs.
Yeah.
His death takes place in haste. They bury him in haste. He's buried in poverty. The whole thing is done in obscurity and a total lack of ceremony. They basically rush him into the grave, cover him up with this cloth, and they don't even have time to wash him or properly anoint him. And so it sort of goes along with the fact that even though Jesus is the King of Kings, he says, I'm here to serve you. I'm not here to be served. And so the shroud is kind of the testimony to both his humanity and his humility, as well as to his divinity.
Yeah, the miraculous image of a crucified man, and of course the idea is that the body on the image is clearly dead, with the rigor mortis, but yet the body appears to have been this immense source of the energy that somehow transferred the image of the body onto that shroud. And some people have said that this could be the very moment of, I mean, we can't demonstrate this scientifically, but it's not inconsistent with the idea of that energy source being the physical correlation of the resurrection itself. That it is consistent with that idea.
Right. And that seems to be the only explanation, the only realistic explanation for this.
Well, as I say, I've been studying the shroud now for about a year. I had heard of it, of course, way back in the Stirp times, in the late 70s. And thinking about how that image got there quite intensely and talking to others about it over the past year, no one else can come up with any explanation of how that image got there other than a very short burst of very intense radiation that relayed negative and three-dimensional information from the body imprinted onto the shroud. It's really hard to think of any alternative explanation for that.
Well, there's some people that allege that it was a chemical reaction, but I myself would agree with you. I think that the most realistic explanation is that it was radiation at the time of the resurrection.
A chemical would be vapors, there would be diffusion. It wouldn't be so high resolution because the shroud is a very high resolution, precise image.
Yes, and that's why I can't go along with that chemical explanation.
No.
I think it has to be radiation, but that's my opinion.
Yep. Rich, thank you so much. Clearly done a lot of work on that, very concisely laid out. We appreciate that, and many others appreciate it also. So thank you so much for your time. And
I'm happy to be of service, and I'm glad to be here. And I salute you for your past, for what you've done and what you will be doing. If you're interested in reading more of my articles, some of them are on shroud.com. They're also on academia.edu, my own website, richardsorensen.com. And I've started doing my own videos too. I have a site called, or a YouTube channel rather, called Biblical Mysteries Explained, so you can see more of my stuff there.
And we'll certainly put the links to that.
Very good.
And you obviously you're welcome to put this video up there as well if you want to.
Well, thank you.
I will send you a high resolution copy. But for now, Rich, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. God bless you.
And God bless you, and God bless everyone watching.
If you like this channel, please click on the like and share buttons. If you want to see more videos from this channel, please click on the subscribe and notify buttons. Thanks for watching.